Well, hi everyone. I'm really happy to be here tonight, and this is quite a crowd. There's 30 of us on here, so appreciate you all tuning in tonight. And I love questions, so I will try to keep an eye. And um, Lisa, feel free to interrupt me if you see something pressing, but definitely feel free to chat me questions at any time during this. So, like I said, my name's Elliott Nelson, and I work for a program called Michigan Sea Grant. Just a little about me before Sea Grant. I grew up in the Eastern Upper Peninsula in Cedarville, moved away for a while, 10 years or so,
You went to Zoom?
and then came back to our wonderful northern Michigan and have lived up here again for the last 8 years in Pickford, Cedarville area up in the Eastern UP. So I work for an organization called Michigan Sea Grant. And so Sea Grant is actually our goal. My job is to help foster economic growth and protect Great Lakes coastal resources throughout Michigan. We're actually a trifecta organization. So I work for our extension part, but we also have our University of Michigan office, and we do research, education, and outreach. So we're run by Michigan State University and the University of Michigan, but we receive half our funding from the federal government as well as oversight from NOAA. So we're a federal state partnership. And we do a variety of work, including environmental literacy and workforce development. And I have really been a champion for birds to be part of the Great Lakes coastal resources that we talk about. And so I do a lot of birding education. We're all around the state, but you can see I'm based up in the Eastern UP. So if you ever have questions about the Great Lakes, you can reach out to us or go to our Ask an Expert webpage. So that's a little bit about me and my organization. But let's talk about what we really want to talk about tonight, right? The birds. So tonight I'm going to talk about a few different things, but really this is kind of light on the ecology, heavy on the bird pictures, but I'll cover a little bit of bird ecology and what's happening in the Eastern UP this winter. But like I said before, always feel free to share questions in the chat and also just share comments or cool things. The more interactive, the better. I'm going to just highlight some of the major habitats that we bird in the Eastern UP in the winter, and this would really apply to Petoskey of northern Michigan. So a lot of this you can translate. And then I'll talk a little bit about birds surviving the winter and winter ecology. So first off, before we go, on a count of three, see who can put it in the chat first. What kind of species is this bird? So while you're typing up in the chat, see who can get it first. This is a chunky fella that travels in large flocks and likes to eat fruit. Later in the winter is often fermented, resulting in a bunch of drunk, silly birds. They are irregular migrants and they move very fast. And Lisa got it. Lisa, of course, as the president, that's appropriate. This is our beautiful Bohemian waxwing, one of our winter birds that we sometimes get lucky enough to see. So I'll talk more about them later, but great job. And if you didn't know it, the Bohemian waxwing is very similar to our cedar waxwing, but you could notice that it has a grayish belly, not a yellowish belly, which is really the easiest way, I think, to differentiate them, unless you know the calls, and that nice, beautiful cinnamon undertail. They're just a gorgeous, chunky waxwing. But if you see a waxwing with a gray belly, not a yellow belly, that's a good sign you're on a Bohemian. So key points for winter birding. If you haven't birded in the winter before, I'm sure most of you have, but as you know, there are a lot less birds, right? We go from something like, 250 possible birds during fall migration down to like 50 or less possible birds in the winter. So there's not a lot of birds, and that means the woods are going to be really slow. If you go on a walk in the woods like you normally would, that is probably going to end up with not a huge list of birds. Oh, let me see some cool things. But what we do have are very unique visitors that can't be seen any other time of the year. And I actually love winter birding because you get to target more unique habitats than you normally would. And so I think I break it into four kind of primary birding locations that I like to check out in the winter. That's open water, if you can find some, which this winter it's definitely been back and forth, but we had a lot. I just drove over the bridge, so I saw quite a bit of open water still in the straits even. We also have our open fields, our boreal forests, and our backyard feeders. So this is the Eastern UP winter birding map. I'll have a link to it at the end, and maybe Lisa can send them out, or whoever sends your emails out after this talk. And this is just a kind of rundown of the places that have the most birds in the Eastern UP. You can see that I break it down on the left in the key by feeders and forest locations in purple, a few random gull locations in reddish orange, water locations, which are very dependent on that year, and then mixed forest and open fields in green and yellow. And those are kind of our more open grassland areas. Before we get in it, I always like another trivia. So, who knows what this funky fella is and lady here? This is a pair of male and female of this particular species. They've had a name change in the last few years. And Terry got it already. It's the long-tailed duck. So the long-tailed duck is one of our winter specialties that is often, these ducks forage pretty far out in the water because they can dive as deep as 200 feet. Think about that, 200 feet deep. If we went down 200 feet, our brains would be crushed. But these are the deepest diving ducks in all of North America. And they can actually expel all of the air out of their lungs so that they don't get crushed when they dive. Truly incredible. They're just a gorgeous bird, too, the long-tailed duck. And what's cool is in the winter, sometimes if we have limited open water, they come a little closer to shore. So anywhere you find open water in the winter, ducks tend to congregate in that open water. Ducks are not the kind of migrants that migrate, or at least most species, based on the time of year or length of day. Rather, they often migrate based on food availability and open water. So as long as there's open water, we do tend to have ducks around, and the more it freezes, the less we see them. If you're birding in the Eastern UP, well, first off, in Petoskey, down in your area, the Great Lakes are one of those areas where you can have open water, especially around river mouths and the rivers themselves. Those are really good places to check. Anywhere there's moving water, if you know of a dam, especially later in the winter when all the other water freezes up, the water below a dam is normally open, and that can house some of these far out species like long-tailed duck or white-winged scoter and push them inward. So it's always a good time of year to check open water in the winter because it might push some of those birds that are farther out closer to shore. For the Eastern UP, a lot of our water is frozen, like Detour in the Cedarville area, but St. Ignace and the Sault still house quite a bit of open water. And in fact, Sault Ste. Marie, the St. Mary's River, stays open almost all year round, providing a little bit of limited habitat for whatever ducks decided to stick it out for the winter. Most of the other areas are frozen, but like I said, this year's weird. And one of the things that's really fun to look for are swans. The swans that come through this time of year, we of course have the mute swans, the invasive species, but trumpeter swans have really skyrocketed. I don't know if you know, but trumpeter swans were one of the rarest birds in North America. They were down to, I think, under 100 breeding pairs. And through a long-term recovery effort over many, many years, they have come back. And actually, the first place to try to start recovering trumpeter swans in the east was actually the Kellogg Bird Sanctuary in Kalamazoo, where I've actually been and seen from the I think it was 1940s, a homemade egg tumbler that actually rotated the eggs to keep them warm. And once those birds hatched, they started to move them up to Seney National Wildlife Refuge, where there is now a booming population, so much so that we can find wintering trumpeter swans on open rivers. If you've ever been down to the Huron River in Ann Arbor, you can hear their bold trumpet call. And if you're lucky, you can find open water that may have these birds this time of year. They make a gorgeous trumpeting call, and they're the largest waterfall in the world, actually, by weight, I believe. And so they're really impressive species. The one on the left is tundra swans, which look a little bit different and tend to have a little yellow on their bill sometimes and some other distinguishing features. So the open water is good when you've got it. I actually get to ride the ferry out to Mackinac Island for the Christmas bird count, and I normally see about 100 long-tailed ducks. So if the ferry's still running, or if you catch it next year in December, try taking the Mackinac Island ferry out sometime. It runs from St. Ignace to Mackinac Island, and you can actually get a chance to see these long-tailed ducks flying on both sides. It's really neat. One of the other cool things is that rarities tend to show up, especially the more water that freezes, the more rarities start to pop up as they're kind of concentrated in those remaining open water spots. I don't know if you guys ever had a purple sandpiper in Petoskey. Does anybody know? That's our bird on the left here. Purple sandpiper is a very rare species for the Great Lakes, but they do show up in the winter and hang out on breakwalls. So I'm always looking at breakwalls to see if I can be the one to find that rare purple sandpiper. And some of the birds that sometimes show up are things like this common eider on the right, another coastal ocean bird that sometimes shows up in the winter. So always keep your eyes open for those rarities that are still in the remaining open water. Any questions about that? So again, these birds' adaptation for surviving the winter, well, they have the adaptations they need to survive the cold. A variety of things like thick downy feathers and really specially adapted feet, so that with these really tightly wound veins that keep their feet alive and not frozen. Um, but their other adaptation is to leave once the ice is over and they head to farther out. So their adaptation is to be around until it's too hard. Yeah, Petoskey breakwall for purple sandpiper. If you can check it for me and find one, that'd be awesome. So the thing that brings a lot of people up to the Eastern UP, and this slide's a little sad, is some of our boreal specialties. So the boreal forest is a forest that circums the entire northern part of the world. It actually is found in Russia and Japan and Europe and in North America. We are right at the edge of the boreal forest, and as you may have thought with our warming world, we are kind of seeing the boreal forest get pushed out of the UP. So now is the time before these things are completely gone to try to look for them. Unfortunately, boreal chickadees, which used to be fairly easy to find in parts of the UP, are now extremely rare, with only a few breeding populations left. So boreal chickadee, unless you're lucky to get a vagrant one, they tend to not be around much anymore. We haven't had reports of boreal chickadees since 2022-23 winter, when there was a slight push, a pulse of them that came down from the north, an eruption, which I'll talk about in a little bit. But they are really unlikely. That being said, Canada jay, although now much more uncommon, does still have some holdouts in the eastern UP if you know where to look. And I'll show a map here in a second. Black-backed woodpecker is another really one that people like to find. They are still around, but they are extremely hard to get eyes on, as they're really tend to stay deep in the spruce swamps as they feed on flaked bark. But if you find an area with a recent burn, they do tend to be more dense in areas where trees have been burned, as they feed on the bugs that move into those burned tree trunks. And the last one is the spruce grouse, which actually is around in pretty good numbers and doing quite well, it seems. So spruce grouse is sort of the holdout that's in good numbers. But if you've ever gone looking for a spruce grouse before, you probably know they are pretty tricky to find. So let's kind of get a little more into that. So the first one here, oops, is I can't see which map this is. This is my spruce grouse map. So this is some of the recent sightings, and you can see they're really concentrated up by Whitefish Point and Tequamanon. This is a kind of a primary holdout for spruce grouse. And one of the areas that they've been seen is along the road that runs out to Tequamanon Falls here, but alongside that road are some offshoots. Now, I will say it's easier to get to spruce grouse locations in the not winter. So they are a year-round bird. They don't actually leave and they don't really move around much. But most of their sites, like Preacher Road, has been a really popular site. That's right here. It's right off of the highway that runs to Tequamanon Falls. That is a seasonal road, as most of these are. So if you're looking for spruce grouse in the winter, you're not going to have a lot of roads to drive down to look for them. Mainly just that primary road that runs out to Quamanon Falls. But if you check early in the morning, you're really determined to get a winter spruce grouse. They do like to eat grit alongside the road. And actually, one was just seen at the Christmas bird count for Whitefish Point, I believe up by Vermilion Road up here at this slab. So Vermilion Road is plowed up a little ways, and that's a good spot to check. You're better off, though, waiting till the summer or when the snow clears and checking Preacher Road, as that's been really popular. Another one I'm going to show really quick, and I just need to get this out of the way, is Are we still seeing let's see, I can see here. Yeah, it's still there. Great. So the other one was the Canada Jay. So they've become really hard to get, but there is a road called Donner Road, just a little bit west of Newberry, that has had Canada Jays every winter. Dennis McNeil has been reporting them on eBird for the last 3 years. And that road may not be plowed, but if you can go along that road or walk a little bit up it, that's your best bet right now for finding Canada Jay. Unfortunately, the Hulbert Bog, which was a really good, reliable spot for Canada Jay over here, a little closer to Sault Ste. Marie, is no longer active. So if you're looking for that bird, I would highly recommend heading over to the Donner Road in the Donner area. And they're out there still. There are random reports, but you have to kind of check areas people haven't checked before, which is a little different than when they used to be really easier. All right. Well, yeah. So somebody says they've had 0 for 3 for Canada Jay or Gray Jay in the last several years, but more luck with the other ones, which is great. They are hard to find. So these boreal specialties are kind of the shot in the dark, if you will. They're hard to find. So let's get to some of the other ones that are less hard to find. This is one of the eruptive species that sometimes is in good numbers. This is another quiz. So if you know this species, go ahead and put it in the chat. Fun folk, these funky folks use their unique bills to work their way down a pine cone and pick out the seeds from the inside. And they pair up in monogamous pairs and can breed any time of the year when they find abundant food sources. So I've seen baby red crossbills, which I just gave it away. I didn't see anyone put it in the chat, in the summer, but I've also seen them in the fall. I have never seen baby ones in the winter, but they can breed anytime they have enough pine cones. And what's kind of cool is that um, they have oriented bills. To see how they cross on the left for one of these birds here, and maybe on the right for the other. The top bill either crosses on the left or the right. And this means that if they have a left-oriented bill, they circle up a pine cone to the left. A right-oriented bill, they circle up the pine cone to the right because it makes it easier for them to pick into that cone and get the seeds. And their pairs always pair up with a left and a right. Males and females, doesn't matter which one has which, but they always pair up with a left and a right so that they can most efficiently, as their monogamous pair, get every seed out of every cone. I just think it's really cool how adapted these birds are to these pine cones. So, finches are kind of one of the main birds that do this in an eruptive manner, but they're basically something called an eruption with an I that controls whether or not we see a lot of these winter specialties. And an eruption is basically an event in which a population of birds will push into new areas that they are not normally. And the big cause of this for things like finches has to do with their food source. So everything with birds is about survival and food. Many birds are living on the edge of starvation at all times, so they need consistent food. And some of their crops, some of their food sources do not always grow consistently. So this is a black spruce here on the right, and black spruce can have years with tons of cones and years with almost no cones. This year is a pretty good year in the boreal forest for cones, so they're not all coming out. But that is one of the reasons that some years we see lots of crossbills and some years we see almost none because their home base in the boreal forest in Canada sometimes has a lot of food and sometimes it doesn't. And the crazy thing is they somehow know to go east or west or south or north. They don't necessarily just go south if they don't have food. Some years they'll go west and some years they'll go south. This year, a lot of birds are heading to the Adirondacks and the Rocky Mountains as the spruce cone crops are really good there. But it's not just spruce. Spruce is for, and cones are for the crossbills. But there are other fruiting trees like, does anyone know what this red-berried tree is right here? It's ornamental a lot of times. It's gorgeous, and it is a food hotspot for birds. They grow naturally all across northern Michigan and into the UP. And yes, Quinn, you got it. That is the mountain ash. So mountain ash crops in the boreal forest are another big factor, especially for things like waxwings. Waxwings are really dependent on mountain ash. So in years where there's a lot of mountain ash berries in the boreal forest, we don't see so many Bohemian waxwings. In years when there's less, we see quite a few. And the mountain ash crops weren't super great this year, and so we did see pretty big movements of waxwings into our area this year, especially in November and December. which is weird. Some years we don't see the waxwings until February when they run out of food in the north, and then they come down later. And then the last one is on the right here, and that's paper birch catkins. So birch create these little almost cone-like things called catkins that have a bunch of seeds in them. And this is a favorite food of the redpoll. And redpolls are actually around in pretty good numbers this year as the catkin crops weren't great up in the boreal forest. But the catkin crops were really good here in northern Michigan. So one interesting thing is that we're not seeing redpolls at bird feeders because there's so many natural food sources for them that they're tending to stay away from bird feeders and just feed on birch trees. I've seen redpolls this year about 5 or 6 times, and every time it has been on a birch tree eating catkins, never once at a feeder. And most eBird reports are showing just one or two showing up at feeders, but flocks of 20 to 100 out in wild spaces in some of these. So that's kind of a rundown of eruptions for finches, particularly. In years with high food sources in their home base of the boreal forest of Canada, we don't see them. And in years where those food sources are disrupted, sometimes we'll see them move quickly through in the fall because there's still not enough food for them here. And other times they'll head west, and other times they'll come through and stay all winter and feed on our food sources here. The map on the left shows you red-breasted nuthatches from September 2017 versus 2018, and they're another eruptive species. We always get them, of course, but folks down in the southern lower peninsula and south of us and on the east coast get really excited for red-breasted nuthatch eruptions when they see a lot more. So just again to kind of go through these finches, and most of these finches you look for either at bird feeders or you look for them in spruce forests or along areas with lots of birch trees. These are our two crossbills, so the red crossbills that we had on the quiz there, and then the white-winged crossbill. Unfortunately, this year in the eastern UP, white crossbills do not seem to be present. I haven't had any move around since the fall, and there are no eBird reports as of now. So this is a low year for white-winged crossbill, sadly. For red crossbill, though, we have a core population in Rako and Tequamanon that's there year-round. And so even in years where we don't have big eruptions, there tends to be a core population that still stays in this area. So if you drive along Ranger Road in Rako or at Tequamanon Falls, learn the call of a red crossbill. It kind of sounds like a typewriter. It's chee chee ching ching. And that call you can hear often flying a few birds overhead. Sometimes if you're lucky, they'll land on the road and feed on grit. So if you see birds on the side of the road, pull over. And red crossbills are definitely a possible bird to get, especially in Rako and Tequamanon. Some of the other finches, wings that kind of show up tend to be some of these other folks here. So this is a purple finch, which we do have all years as a stable core breeding population, but a lot of years they disappear in the winter or move around. This year is a low to medium year for purple finch, so we are just seeing a few here and there at feeders, but not big, huge flocks. The red polls down on the bottom here, those red polls are actually around in pretty good numbers, but not at feeders, like I said, so a little harder to find. That being said, as the winter progresses, they'll start to show up at feeders more and more as they lose some of their natural food sources or finish it off and eat it. One of our big numbers this year are this beautiful little piggy bird on the right here. I call them piggers because that's their 4-letter abbreviation for the official abbreviation. It's PIGR. And this is a pine grosbeak, which is just, have you all seen pine grosbeaks before? It is truly, I see a lot of heads nodding, truly just one of my favorite parts of winter. I cannot get excited enough about pine grosbeaks. I love them because, for one, they're a big bird. They're like the size of a robin, and when they fly, you can notice how barrel-chested they really are. They have one of the biggest barrel chests, must have huge lungs and very powerful wings, and that big old belly to store a lot of fruit. They're primarily fruit eaters, so you'll mostly see them at fruit trees, although they do come to feeders too. And this year, at least in December, and I haven't been out too much in the last week, but I think they're still pretty much everywhere in the eastern UP. I've had flocks, when I put out feed, I haven't been consistently feeding, but I've had flocks at my house in Pickford of up to 12 to 15 birds as soon as I put the seed out. And they're pretty much everywhere, including Cedarville, Pickford, the Sioux. Just find a fruit tree or some feeders, and you'll probably find a pine grosbeak this winter. That means they may be possible down in the northern lower as well in your area, so keep an eye out.
Evening grosbeaks in moderate numbers in the UP this year. That was kind of a conclusion there. But especially looking for them in Pickford, along the homes that are right in the downtown area. That's one of your best bets. Cedar waxwings and Bohemian waxwings are both present, but in fairly medium numbers, I would say. Bohemian waxwings came through in really big numbers in December, but they're starting to out a little. That being said, up in Sault Ste. Marie, there's a lot of fruit trees at a couple places that I have listed on the map, and they are still present there, and sometimes in numbers up to 100 or plus in a flock. And so seeing these birds is definitely a possibility this winter. That's a bit of a rundown on the winter finches this year, which, again, these birds, here's some of the locations. You can see them. They're mostly in those purple areas in forests or feeders. And as I mentioned, the most diverse set of finches that I've seen this year have been in the Pickford area. So there is homes right at the main intersection of town that tend to have feeders, and there's a lot of fruit trees right in the town. And then there is another small patch right up the Gagamane River on Riverside Road that just had some more evening grosbeaks reported, and is another really good spot to check for grosbeaks and redpolls, as this has some of the redpoll birch areas. So driving from Pickford up to Riverside Road is a really good route to go this year if you're looking for winter finches. And as I mentioned, the red crossbills, which if you haven't had a chance to see them before, now's a good time when there's not a ton of birds. Rako is one of their main areas, as well as the Tequamanon area. And those are really good spots to check. There's a road called Ranger Road that's plowed. A lot of our roads are seasonal, so you can't access all of those winding back roads. But that's kind of good. It makes it harder to get lost. So let's keep heading through. So this is just a quick note. This is a few years old now. But if you used to like to find the hoary redpoll in the mix of common redpolls, they are no longer to find as two species. And so redpoll is now considered a single species. This has been a few years old, so it might not be news for anyone. But I still like to look for the really pale redpolls in there. There was a genetic study that showed there was a super gene that controlled all of the genetics for these birds. And so they kind of decided that they were just morphologically different, but not genetically different enough to be different species. Maybe one day they'll separate them again. That's how it goes. We lump and split birds based on the most recent science and also some other factors I don't understand. And right now, though, this is a single species. But that being said, you can still list as a subspecies, hoary or regular common redpoll. And so it's still kind of fun to pick through for those pale birds. All right, let's go for another fun trivia. Here we go. These are Dancy boys. I call these the Dancy boys. And this is one of my favorite things, one of my favorite species to search out in the winter up here. These are competitive breeders. And so they actually form something called a lek, which is a big group of these birds that get together in the morning and dance, just like you see in that photo there. They stomp their feet around, they shake their tails to make a rattling noise, and they puff up these pink sacs on their neck. They're really, really funky, but a lot of fun to watch. If anybody knows what this species is, go ahead and put it in the chat. Yes, Terry got it. It's the sharp-tailed grouse. And so sharp-tailed grouse, you don't have to come up in the winter to see these. These are winter year-round birds, but February and March are the best 2 months to see this courtship display. So they don't really get going until February, mid-February or so. But once they do, you can find upwards of 50 birds sometimes on a lek if you look really hard. Normally somewhere between 8 and 15, but sometimes they can be in bigger groups. And these are some wonderful photos from Steve Baker. Many of you know the birds will head to head, just dance at each other. They'll sometimes get real excited and jump. They almost never touch each other, but occasionally they'll get very aggressive and do little leaps like this. to try to intimidate each other. And if you watch these birds dance, you're watching the males. And if you look around for the bird that's just sort of sullenly sitting in the corner, that's the females just watching the display, because that's what they do. Not saying anything about humans. These are birds, not humans. But it is really fun to try to find the females and look at how disinterested they often look. But really, what those males are doing is to try to show their fitness, that they have the best genes to reproduce with through the ability to expend energy on this silly dance. um, like I said, if you're up here in February through May, you can find them on their leks. And so just outside of Pickford in the Minuscin potholes is a cattle farm. And just south of the potholes, that cattle farm has a little stand of trees that almost always has a lek. It's a really perfect spot to see them. They're safely far enough away from the road that you won't disturb them, but you can get some really good looks and they're not too far out. And that's generally February through May. If you come up this month, they may not be on their leks yet, but in the mornings, you can often find them congregating in birch trees, again, or aspen trees a lot of times, eating the buds. They're not going for the catkins. They're actually eating the buds for the next year's leaves. And so you can find them up at the top of a tree or even at feeders. Right in downtown Pickford is a home on John Street that often has sharp-tailed grouse on their roof and on the ground eating the seeds that are put out. So fun experience. Another one is it's a 22-mile road that runs out to the Minuscin potholes, but closer to the expressway or highway there. And there's another feeder where they tend to congregate. So really good time to year to see the sharp-tailed grouse anytime in the next few months. And again, they're year-round. They don't move, so their survival is really based on foraging those buds that they can get and any seeds they can find. Okay, so now we're getting to some of the other species that people really have high on their list. This is an owl, of course. If anyone knows what owl it is, feel free to. Oh, we already got someone in the chat. Let's see who got it. Yes, it's Lisa's nemesis, the great gray owl, one of the hardest birds to find in North America, even though I actually am coming to believe that there's always a couple of great grays in the eastern UP. I'll talk about that in a second. Crazy thing about these, North America's largest owl by height and wingspan, and only half the weight of snowy owls and great horned owls. So they are just a fluff ball, a foofball, if you will. They are really tall, really big wings, very tiny feet, very small structure underneath all that down. And so this is one of our winter specialty owls, which are very rare and hard to find. But this year, past year in the summer, there was a great gray owl breeding record. And this is actually the second time it's been documented really well. But it's believed that there's probably small numbers of these great gray owls breeding in the eastern UP, primarily in like the Rayco area and also the Minuscin area is where they tend to be popping up a lot. The idea with why I think they're so hard to find is I've done a lot of looking into this biology, and great gray owls people often look for along big fields and open fields along the edges. But great gray owls are a woodland species. They're not really an open grassland species. When we get to see them along those open grasslands, it's because they're desperate and hunting those areas. But what they really like are little boggy openings and small little patches of opening in the heart of these spruce swamps and things like that. One of the areas that has actually had quite a few records in the last few years, I'm going to just try to pull up the map again, pull it up here, is down in Cedarville on Search Bay Road and Old St. Ignace Road here. Because these roads cut through some really dense spruce habitat and cedar swamps and things like that, it's actually, I think, a really good spot. Last winter, there was great gray owl seen in this area multiple times. I didn't know about it until it was almost gone, but almost the end of the winter. But I don't think this area gets enough traffic from birders because most birders are checking Riverside Road, which is a really good road to check, especially along 11 and 12 mile. But these are other areas where you can find great grays. The Rayco area out here also has, especially if you go north up Ranger Road a ways or north in Rayco at the Four Corners, there's some dense habitat there too. So they're also extremely good at camouflaging. I have drove right past a great gray owl that was perched right next to the road, and I watched the people behind me pull over and look at it and go, "Wow, I just passed a great gray owl." So they are very hard to find. They are a nemesis bird for many, but when you get that special moment with one, there is almost nothing else like it. Um, we haven't had any reports of any of these three species, the northern hawk owl or the gyre falcon, yet this winter. But that being said, northern hawk owl, which is another eruptive owl that will come down sometimes, there were about 3 or 4 in the UP in late November and early December. So they moved through, which means it could be a good year for one to find one, but we don't have any found known ones yet. All of these birds set up winter territories, just like the snowy owl I'm going to talk about in a second here. And so once they're on their territory, it can be a little easier to find. But the gyre falcon in particular, gyre falcon, these birds have territories that tend to span something like a 25-mile squared area. So it's not like they're going to just be in one spot. But they really like open fields, along with the hawk owls also like more open fields than great grays. So these are really good ones to check along Riverside Road and the areas with lots of hay fields in Pickford and Rudyard. One other note on gyre falcon is they also like to hunt sea ducks and other ducks along ice shelves. So the St. Mary's River in the Sault Ste. Marie has had some of the highest numbers of sightings as those gyre falcons skim the open water along the St. Mary's. But they're, again, fast. They're real gone real fast. So one thing about how it is that these birds, these owls in particular, are able to eat their prey with so much snow. I wanted to talk for a minute about snowpacks. I know this doesn't sound like a cool topic, but I found it to be extremely fascinating. I've been reading a book called Winter Ecology, and I've always wondered, how is it that mice and other small mammals can survive underneath all that snow, right? Um, I have always thought that like the bottom of the snow must be so dense from all that weight pushing it down, right? How is it that mice can even survive at the very bottom of the snow? Well, this is a temperature profile for a snowpack. And so what we're seeing here is the fact that the coldest part of snow is actually tends to be more in the middle consistently, or at the top, depending on the day in particular. And the reason for that is that the ground is always close to 32 degrees, never colder. And so in the winter, the ground is actually warm compared to the air and a lot of the snow and that snowpack. If you look at this graph, it shows that 0 degrees is pretty much what the ground always stays at its snowpack. It's always around -5 in the middle, and the top is variable based on the day, right? If it snowed a lot or if it's warm that day or cold that day, it swings back and forth. So it's highly, highly variable. So with that, where do you think the densest part of our snowpack would be then? Any thoughts? Well, I'll just tell you. This is a hard concept for me to grasp when I first learned it. The least dense part of the snowpack is either the top when there's a really fresh snow that's really light, but always the bottom. So the bottom of the snowpack actually has ambient heat that's always coming off the earth, and that actually melts the snow at the bottom and causes moisture to rise up higher into the snowpack. So the bottom of the snowpack, down at the very bottom, if you've ever, right now, if you can go out and find the bottom of the snowpack, it's actually like sand. It's crumbly, it's really, really porous, and it's very easy at that bottom for mammals like mice and voles to make little tunnels through the bottom of the snowpack. They can survive because the bottom of that snowpack becomes really light and not dense as all that heat lifts the moisture. The densest part of the snowpack is almost always in the middle. Now, this, of course, if you get a really wet snow, it can be really dense at the top. But generally speaking, as we're kind of in the peak of winter, the snowpack in the middle is really dense, and it can be light or icy at the top, but it's always sandy and crumbly and really the least dense at the bottom. And so that's why mice and other voles can live around there. So what that means is that owls have adapted and some of our big raptors to punch through that snowpack to get to the very bottom. And so that's what an owl is adapted to do. That's why if you've ever seen pictures of an owl's legs, I don't have a good one. If you've seen a picture of an owl's legs extended all the way out, it's weird. It's like a foot long. They have these really long legs that they normally keep tucked in. But what they're doing is waiting for that chance to hear an animal, a small vole or mouse. They can literally hear it. These big facial discs are thought to actually reflect sound into their ear holes, which are behind there. And once they hear it, they launch themselves down and punch through that snowpack with their feet. And so that's how they kind of have evolved to harvest those small mammals that are way down at the bottom of the snowpack. It's really a truly incredible feat because if you try to punch through the snowpack yourself, it can be very hard to get down to the bottom. Our feet aren't really well designed for that. You actually need something small and narrow to punch right down to the bottom. And that's what these different raptors do. So just kind of a fun fact, but I think it also kind of highlights how there can be variability. So some years we might have a lot of owls, but then if you get an ice at the top and it's a really hard ice crust, that can sometimes prevent the owls from punching through to the bottom layer. And so with our weird weather this year, it was raining when I left home up in the UP. It may move the owls around, and that is particularly important for our snowy owls, which I'll get to in a second. Rough-legged hawks are around in really good numbers this year in the eastern UP, and these are a daytime bird. They come in many color varieties from dark to light. I highly encourage you, if you come up or if you're doing a day of birding, see how many color variations you can find of rough-legged hawks, because they can come from almost all the way black to almost all the way white. But these birds are doing that same thing. They're flying around looking for small mammals. Sometimes they'll catch ones that run out of the snowpack, but they also have the ability to punch through that snowpack. Before I get to snowy owls, one other raptor group that's around in good numbers always, of course, the bald eagle that you see on the left here. Bald eagles take 4 years to reach their full adult plumage. And so we have a lot of these kind of interesting mottled looking ones. Here's a 3-year bird. They get this cool stripe on their head. There's, I think, a 1-year bird down here. They're often confused, young bald eagles, as you may know, for golden eagles, which we have on the right here. And golden eagles are kind of rare, but also if you kept up with Mackinac Straits Raptor Watch, you know that quite a few move through. And what's also interesting is that some winters, golden eagles will winter in Michigan. There's almost always a few that have wintered in the Jackson area, and they have huge ranges. But the last couple of years, we've actually had golden eagle on our Lake Chanot Christmas bird count, and they seem to be hanging around the St. Ignace Road and Search Bay area. And this year I did the Christmas bird count, and I had an eagle that I think was a golden eagle, but I didn't count it because I never got a good look at it. So it could be there's a golden eagle around again. So if you're in this area, take a second look at those eagles. If you see one with really nice defined white patches under the wings, patches, not like mottled as you see in the bald eagles over here, it's kind of just here and there. But they actually have patches of white and a white tail patch. They also have really shrunken in heads. So if you see an eagle with like a tiny head, that could be the golden eagle. They're not bigger, although they can look bigger. Their dimensions are different. But look for those patches and look for that head being really pinched, and you may get lucky to see a golden eagle. All right, so snowy owls this winter are, of course, always one of the great stories. Snowy owls are a highly eruptive owl species, and one that we have actually been lucky enough to see in really good numbers for the last decade plus in Michigan. Now, 2 winters ago, we had almost none. Last winter, they were back to pretty decent numbers. And what controls this is actually, so in this case, it's not so much that we see them when there's lots of food here and we don't when there's not. It's rather that we see them when they had a really successful summer breeding. So snowy owls breed up in the tundra where there's no trees or it's flat. They make their nests on the ground, and they tend to feed off of something called lemmings. And in some years, there's tons of lemmings because there's a big seed crop. And so there's lots of lemmings. And when there's lots of lemmings, there's lots of baby snowy owls. And a lot of those baby snowy owls survive. And in those years, those baby snowy owls that grow up by the end of summer, tend to have to go to find a new winter place because in the winter, snowy owls really spread out because they need more territory to be able to survive and have enough food. So when we see a lot of snowy owls, it's probably because there was a really good winter of food, or summer rather, of food for them in their breeding ground. There's other factors that can go play into this, um, but that's some of the main ones. I'm going to show. I'm not going to show this video, but I'm going to send a link to it. I just think this is a great video to watch to inspire you to try to find a snowy owl. It's from NPR, and I'll make sure to share it. But I love this video. I do want to make sure I have enough time to cover a few resources and ethics for you. Um, so one thing, when you come up here to bird, particularly with owls, please be really mindful of being an ethical birder. We have had some issues with people in the Eastern UP, mainly baiting owls, when that would be giving them some kind of fake food or even real food. And this can be really bad for the owl if it's a fake food. Anytime they have to fly, that expends valuable energy. Owls are almost always on the brink of starvation. So if you make an owl fly just to come closer to you to get a picture, that's really harmful to the owl. It's not helping it. And the other thing is sometimes people will go out and try to flush an owl to get to see it fly. Again, you're causing it to fly, and that's going to expend some energy. Another good ethic thing to keep in mind is so for owls in general, though, you can view them very easy from your car. It acts as a blind that they tend to not fly when you're in your car. And if you are close and you see an owl open its eyes really big and stare at you, lift its head up, back away slowly because that means it's very aware of you, and it may fly. So you want to just prevent that. Another thing is to remember to clean your feeders. So they don't need to be cleaned as often in the winter, but if you feed the birds, that's great for the birds. It's never harmful unless you don't clean your feeders, and it can end up transmitting disease. So, at least every couple weeks or so, brush off the old seed from your feeders and bring them inside and give them a quick bleach spray, or wash them with soap and water or both. And there's a less chance that you're going to cause any disease to spread. This has particularly been an issue with bird flu or avian influenza, which doesn't affect most songbirds, but it does affect waterfowl and raptors. So if you have ducks coming to your feeder, maybe consider not feeding the birds for a while till the ducks disperse, as it can be a congregation place where that disease can spread. And of course, don't trespass. That's obvious, I think. But people do it all the time up here. A farm field is private land, so just stay on the road. So there's my little plug for ethics. But most of the birders that come up here are very ethical. We have very few problems with this, as the birding community loves its birds. Some resources. So I covered a lot of stuff really fast, kind of threw some stuff out there, but thankfully it's all written down in an Eastern UP winter birding update, which just got published 2 days ago. And so you can access that now. And I basically run down each of those species that we went through with more details about where they're being seen and where they're not. And then you can also visit the North Huron Birding Trail to have access to that map and to plan out your own trip up here to the Eastern UP. So with that, I will take any questions folks have, and I will leave my contact info up here, right here.
All right. Well, feel free to jump in if you have any questions. You can put them in the chat, or you can feel free to unmute yourself. And Elliott, thank you so much. Oh my goodness, expert observations and amazing coverage of what's going on in the UP. Appreciate all your efforts.
No problem. I'm happy to be here, and I love sharing. So
I'll echo Lisa's sentiments there. Really saved my hide here.
no problem. No problem. I'm sorry for the internet connectivity issues. In all honesty, I'm sitting outside of Big B and Gaylord as I'm on my way to Detroit because I'm flying to Florida tomorrow. So I am avoiding the winter birds for a long weekend here to get some winter sun.
It's an excellent presentation.
Yeah, and as I said, at least I can share this presentation with you. You have it recorded as well. Those two resources I referenced at the end, are going to have a whole summary of what I just said and talked over minus the ecology bits there.
We do have a question on an idea of a few locations to see snowy owls in the UP, a few reliable spots.
Yeah, so let me pull the map back up, one of the maps here. And really the most reliable location is in Rudyard. So Rudyard has always seemed to have at least one or two snowy owls, even in years where we don't see them anywhere else in the state. It actually has the highest count of snowy owls on, I think, tied for the highest for any Christmas bird count anywhere. So in the big years, there's a lot. But this year, there seems to be around 5 or so on territory. Although this warm weather we had may have shaken them up a little bit. I can't say for sure. But most reports, somebody's getting at least one or two. And this is called the Snowy Owl Loop or the Rudyard Loop right here. So this is on that Eastern UP map. So you can pull up that map and look at it a little closer. But it's a road called Centerline Road and then Hans Road. They run right along I-75. And so you can drive along both of those roads and look in the telephone poles, look on hay bales, look at the top of barns, or even like there's some broken barns. They love to sit on broken barns, like the rubble that's left behind. And so that's really your best bet for snowy owl. A lot of people come up here right up I-75, get off on that Rudyard exit and start searching. Now they can be hard to find, even if there's a number of them around, as they are all white, and it is all white up in the UP right now. But your best bets are dawn and dusk, which is when they tend to move around the most. So especially if you want to see a snowy owl flying, dawn and dusk, the Rudyard Loop, Centerline and Hans Road, that's your best bet.